They said it was just a routine stop. They said the girl matched a description, but no one mentioned the growl. Not the one that rumbled low, steady, right before everything changed. What would you do if the one meant to protect you turned into a threat, and the only one who stood up was on four legs? This isn't just a story about a bite. It's about a bond that defied silence. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps us out. And drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Make sure to watch this video till the end, because in the final moments you'll see the journey from an entirely new perspective. Now let's jump into the story. It was just another quiet Thursday in Chestnut Grove, the kind of small town where mailboxes still creaked open and neighbors waved from their porches. School had ended an hour ago, and 13-year-old Nina Bennett walked home slowly, her backpack bouncing against her side and her earbuds tucked deep in her ears. She wasn't listening to music, though, just white noise. It helped calm the rush of thoughts. Next to her walked Shadow, her tall, steady Belgian Malinois. His black and tan coat shimmered in the sun, and his alert brown eyes scanned every corner, every movement, every unfamiliar sound. Shadow wasn't just a pet. He had been trained as a personal protection dog by Nina's late uncle, who served in search and rescue units overseas. When her uncle passed, Shadow became Nina's, and from the moment he stepped into her home, he never left her side. Nina never walked alone anymore, not since last year, not after what happened at school, when an argument with a teacher about a misunderstood comment led to a suspension she didn't deserve. Since then, trust came harder, except with Shadow. Shadow didn't judge. He didn't raise his voice. He just watched and listened, and when needed, stepped between Nina and the world. The sidewalks were warm underfoot, lawns were trimmed, sprinklers clicked rhythmically, and the occasional car rolled by without stopping. Nothing seemed unusual until they turned onto Briarwood Avenue, a block from home. That's when she noticed the police cruiser. It sat parked, in the shade across from the gas station. As soon as Nina passed, the engine hummed to life. She felt it before she saw it in her periphery, slowly moving behind her. Not fast, not with sirens, but steady, almost like it was watching. She tugged, one earbud out. Shadow's ears twitched. The car rolled forward and stopped beside the sidewalk. The driver's window slid down with a mechanical buzz. "Hey there," a voice called out. "You live around here?" Nina turned, polite but cautious. The officer was a middle-aged man, stocky, pale, sunglasses hiding his eyes, badge number slightly smudged. "Yes, sir," she said, glancing at Shadow. "Just walking home." "What's your address?" he asked, not smiling. Nina shifted her weight. "I don't think I have to tell you that, sir." The officer's jaw tightened. "You match a description," he said flatly. "I need to confirm who you are." "What description?" she asked, still keeping a calm tone. He opened the door and stepped out of the vehicle. "Show me your ID." "I'm only 13, Nina replied. "I don't carry ID." The officer frowned. "Well, now we have a problem, don't we?" Shadow moved in front of her, calm but alert. His muscles tensed slightly, his stance firm. "You better control that dog," the officer said, stepping closer. "He looks like he's ready to bite." "He's trained," Nina said, her voice a little shakier now. "My uncle was a certified handler. Shadow's protective, but he's not aggressive." "I don't care if he was trained by the president," the officer snapped. "Put him in a down position. Now." Nina hesitated. Something didn't feel right. Shadow wasn't moving. He stood still as stone, watching, listening. The air around them felt heavy, like static before lightning. The officer took another step. Closer. Too close. "Last warning," he said. Then he reached for her arm. Nina yanked away. "Stop. Don't touch me." In one motion, his grip tightened, rough and fast. Nina stumbled back with a yelp, trying to twist free. Shadow barked, once, sharp, not loud but full of warning. He didn't lunge. Not yet. "Get that animal under." "Control," the officer shouted. Nina raised her hands. Please, Shadow, stay. But Shadow didn't stay. He stepped between them, ears flat, growl low in his chest. Not wild, not angry, just steady like a signal. A signal only Nina and the officer could hear. The officer reached toward his belt. The click of a taser filled the space. I said, "Control your dog." "I'm trying," Nina cried, but her voice cracked. "Please, he's just—" Suddenly, the officer pushed forward and shoved Nina away, hard. She fell to the ground, her elbow smacking the pavement. That's when Shadow moved, not for blood, not for rage. He clamped down on the officer's arm just enough to yank him back, just enough to stop him. The officer screamed, "Get this thing off me!" Nina scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. "Shadow, release!" Shadow let go instantly, stepping back to Nina's side. His head stayed high, his body trembling. The street was no longer quiet. Doors opened. A neighbor pointed a phone. Somewhere, sirens began to wail in the distance, but Nina didn't hear any of it. She wrapped her arms around Shadow and whispered, "You did good, boy. You did what Uncle Jonah taught you." And Shadow? He didn't move. He just watched. Watched the cruiser. Watched the man. Watched the world shift, because sometimes the loudest truth comes from the one who can't speak. The IDOM ambulance came before the second police car. By then, Nina and Shadow were already separated. She sat in the back of a cruiser staring out the window, hands clenched in her lap. Her elbows stung, her knees were scraped, and her backpack sat beside her, one strap torn. Across the street, Shadow was locked inside the animal control van, pacing in circles, eyes never leaving her. People were everywhere now. Neighbors, kids on bikes, a man still filming on his phone. It was a different street than just 20 minutes ago. The peace was gone. In its place were whispers, questions, and confusion. The officer, Bradley Kent, sat on the curb, his arm wrapped in gauze. He kept shaking his head and muttering, "Unprovoked? She sicked that dog on me." His words weren't loud, but they traveled. The paramedic nodded and scribbled notes. Within hours, the story began to shift. The police report filed before Nina even got home painted a very different picture. It claimed the officer had stopped her for questioning about a recent bike theft nearby, that she resisted, raised her voice, and that the dog, described as an aggressive, untrained animal, attacked without cause. By the time Claire Bennett picked up her daughter from the station, the damage was already done. Shadow had been taken for observation and labeled a potential public threat. Nina had been suspended from school pending review, and the officer? He'd already been cleared to return to duty by next week. No charges were filed. Yet. At home, Nina sat at the kitchen table in silence. She hadn't spoken much since the incident. Her mother, Claire, paced the room, phone in hand, calling lawyers, the school animal control, anyone who would listen. "Nina," she finally said, placing the phone down. "I need you to tell me again, slowly. What happened?" Nina's eyes welled up. "He grabbed me. I told him I didn't have ID. He didn't believe me. I tried to back up and then he pushed me." Claire sat beside her, taking her hand. "And Shadow?" "He warned him first," Nina said, her voice cracking. "He growled, just once. But when I hit the ground, he didn't wait. He pulled him off me." Claire exhaled slowly. "Okay. Good. That's what I thought." She pulled out her laptop, clicked open a new tab, and typed in, "Civil rights attorney near me." The next day they met Mira Dalton, a sharp, calm lawyer with a quiet fire in her eyes. She listened to Nina's story without interrupting, only nodding at key moments and making careful notes. "And there was no body cam footage?" Mira asked. Claire shook her head. "They said it wasn't recording. Technical issue." Mira didn't respond right away. Then she looked directly at Nina. "You said people were outside, right? Anyone recording?" Nina hesitated. "One neighbor, I saw a phone, but I don't know who it was." "Then we find them," Mira said. The search didn't take long. That same evening, a video began to spread online. It was shaky and didn't show the beginning, but it captured enough. Nina being shoved. Shadow, stepping in, the chaos that followed. The video blew up. It was posted to a local Facebook group first, then a parenting blog, then a regional news site. The headline read, "Teen's dog attacks officer or saves her life." Comments flooded in. Some called Shadow a hero. Others demanded he be put down. But what caught fire were the questions. Why was a 13-year-old being grabbed? Why was the dog removed? Why was there no body cam? Nina stayed off the internet. Claire didn't. Mira called 2 days later. "We have a chance to file a motion to keep Shadow from being euthanized," she said. "Animal control is labeling him as dangerous. We need to act fast." Nina's heart dropped. "They're going to kill him?" "Not if we move now," Mira said. "And not if we tell the full story." Mira filed an emergency motion. In it, she included Nina's written statement, photos of Shadow's training certifications, and the first wave of public support. It bought them time. Shadow would stay in custody, but the city had to hold a hearing before making a decision. Meanwhile, the media kept circling. National blogs picked up the story. A local news anchor aired a segment called "When Instinct Protects, Who Gets to Define a Hero?" Nina's school called. Her suspension remained under review. She walked the halls like a shadow herself. Some kids stared, some whispered, others stayed silent. Only one person, her history teacher, Mr. Forrester, took her aside and said, "I believe you. And I think others will too." That night, Claire showed Nina something on her laptop. "The comments," she said gently. "Look, people from all over had written messages. This dog is smarter than most adults. My service dog would have done the same thing. Why isn't the officer being questioned?" And one that stuck out. "This girl didn't tell her dog to attack. He made that choice for her. That's loyalty." Nina leaned back in her chair, unsure what to feel. The world was spinning, louder than ever, but one thing was becoming clear. Shadow hadn't just bitten an officer. He'd bitten into a system too used to being unquestioned, and now the whole town was paying attention. Nina stood in the mirror, smoothing her hair for the third time. Her hoodie, her favorite one with the faded moon on it, looked just fine, but nothing about this day felt normal. She was going to court. Not as a criminal, but not exactly as a guest either. Shadow was still being held at the city's animal control center. It had been nearly a week, and the empty space beside Nina's bed felt heavier each night. She still reached out sometimes in the dark, expecting to feel his warm body, his steady breathing. But it was just air and blankets. In the quiet of her room, Nina would whisper to herself, "Hold on, boy. Just a little longer." The court hearing wasn't a trial. Not yet. But it would decide one thing that mattered more than anything else right now: whether Shadow would live. Mira Dalton, their lawyer, met Nina and her mother at the courthouse. She was calm as always, dressed in soft gray, holding a folder thick with papers. "Today's just the beginning," Mira said gently. "But we're not walking in empty-handed." She'd gathered everything. Documents showing Shadow's training, a character letter from Nina's old school counselor, and a short note from her uncle's former partner in the rescue unit. But the most powerful piece was a new video. A neighbor across the street had been parked in his driveway during the entire incident. His dash cam had caught the whole thing, from the moment the police cruiser pulled up, to the officer reaching for Nina, to Shadow stepping in. There was sound too, and it changed everything. The officer's voice was recorded clearly. The insults, the slur, the shout, and then the shove. Mira had reviewed it 3 times. Her expression didn't change, but her voice did. It became sharper, more sure. "They can't ignore this," she said. Inside the courtroom, Nina sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't speak during the motion, but she listened closely. Mira argued firmly that Shadow had not attacked out of aggression, but had acted in direct response to a physical assault on his handler. The law, she said, allowed for self-defense, even by a trained animal, when its owner is being harmed. The city attorney tried to argue back, calling Shadow unpredictable and a potential threat to public safety. But he stammered when Mira played the video. The judge didn't rule that day, but he issued a stay. Shadow would not be euthanized. At least, not while the full investigation continued. Nina exhaled for the first time in days. As they walked outside, reporters waited by the steps. Cameras flashed. Microphones hovered. Claire gently guided Nina past them, shielding her from the noise. But people were starting to listen. Later that week, Nina returned to school. It wasn't easy. Students still whispered in hallways. Some gave her looks, half curious, half judging. But something was shifting. A group of older students had started a petition, Bring Shadow Home. It had over 10,000 signatures by the second day. Her science teacher, Mr. Forrester, posted it on his classroom wall with a note beneath. Courage often looks quiet, but it's always loud to the people who need it. One afternoon, Nina's older cousin Jaden, a college student studying criminal justice, came by to visit. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, his cap turned backward and his laptop open. "You're shaking the system, you know that?" he said, scrolling through a news blog. "There are city council members talking about body cam laws because of your case." Nina blinked. "They are?" He nodded. "Your story's being shared across forums and classrooms. A professor at my school even used it in a lecture about use of force." Nina didn't know what to say. She didn't feel powerful. She still felt tired, sad, small. But that night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed with a message from Mira. "Found something important in the police department's manual. I'll call you in the morning." The next day, Mira explained. There was a section in the police K9 protocol about intervention in escalating force. If an animal is trained to recognize signs of harm and reacts during a use of force incident, its actions can be considered lawful if they prevent further injury to a protected person. Shadow hadn't broken any rule. He had followed one. "We'll present this," Mira said, "and we'll press them to explain why that officer's camera wasn't working. We're not just defending a dog anymore. We're defending a decision." Meanwhile, at the animal control center, Shadow waited. Staff kept their distance. Some were uneasy around him. Others whispered about the bite dog. One even snapped a photo and posted it online with a caption, "K9 or criminal," but Shadow didn't snarl. He didn't bark. He sat in his kennel, still and focused, his eyes locked on the door, waiting for Nina, for truth, for justice. The courtroom was quiet. Not the tense, uncomfortable kind of quiet. This was the kind that made people lean in and listen. Nina sat at the front, hands resting in her lap, her mother by her side. She wore a simple blue dress and sneakers, and tucked in her pocket was Shadow's service tag. Just holding it made her feel stronger. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Some held signs. "Justice for Nina," "Shadow saved her," and "Dogs know what we ignore." But inside it was just Nina, her lawyer Mira, and the truth they were finally ready to tell. The judge looked tired but alert. He'd read all the motions, watched the videos, and heard enough news buzz to know this case had become bigger than just one dog and one officer. "Miss Bennett," he said, looking at Nina, "you have the floor." Nina stood slowly. Her legs felt shaky, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "I didn't ask for this to happen," she began. "I didn't wake up that day thinking I was going to become news. I was just walking home." She paused, looking around. "The officer didn't ask me questions. He made assumptions. He didn't see me as a kid. He saw me as a problem, but Shadow saw me." Nina took a breath. "When I was pushed, Shadow didn't attack. He protected. The way he was trained. The way he was taught. And because of that, I'm standing here now." Mira stepped in next, presenting the final evidence. The dash cam footage, the training documents, the department manual outlining protection rights for animals like Shadow. She also included a newly signed statement from a retired K9 officer, confirming that Shadow's actions were within training boundaries. The city attorney stayed quiet. He had no new arguments to make. And when it was over, the judge leaned back, folded his hands and said, I believe we need to reconsider who we label dangerous. A decision wouldn't come that day. But word spread quickly. The courtroom moments were captured by reporters and shared online. Nina's short speech was reposted thousands of times. People called her brave, strong, a voice for others. But she didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a girl who missed her dog. Later that week, Shadow came home. He stepped through the front door like he had never left. Tail wagging low, ears perked, body calm. Nina fell to her knees, wrapping her arms around his thick neck, her face pressed into his fur. "You waited for me," she whispered. "Now I'll make sure no one forgets you did." Nina and her mom started a small community project called Paws of Truth. They held workshops in parks and libraries to teach families about their rights when owning support animals. They shared Shadow's story not just as news, but as a lesson. The city eventually released a statement acknowledging procedural errors in Officer Kent's handling of the situation. He quietly retired weeks later. No formal charges were filed, but the department opened several old complaints involving him, complaints that had been ignored for years. Local schools invited Nina to speak. So did youth groups. She even got a letter from a senator's office asking if she would share her experience at a student safety summit. "I'm just a kid," she told Mira. Mira smiled. "Exactly. And that's why they need to hear you." Shadow grew older. He didn't run as fast as he used to. He spent more time lying by the window watching birds or sleeping beside Nina's desk while she studied. But he was still her shadow, quiet, calm, always there. One afternoon, Nina sat in her room, reading a letter from a girl in another state. "My dog helped me through the hardest year of my life. When I saw what your dog did, I cried. Not because it was scary, but because it was familiar. Thank you for showing the world that protection can look like love." Nina smiled softly and placed the letter in a box next to others just like it. That fall, a mural appeared on the side of the animal shelter where Shadow had once been caged. It showed a silhouette of a girl and a dog standing side by side facing the sun. The words underneath read, "Sometimes the bravest voice is the one that growls before we speak." People stopped to take photos. Some brought their dogs to see it. But Nina didn't go right away. When she finally did, it was early morning. She stood in front of the mural with Shadow beside her. He sat tall, his head held high, calm as always. "You changed more than just my day," she whispered. "You changed how they see us." Shadow didn't bark. He didn't move, but his eyes met hers, and that was enough. Years later, long after, the headlines faded, Nina still told his story. In classrooms, in interviews, in quiet conversations with kids who felt unheard. She never shouted. She didn't have to. Because once, a quiet dog had spoken for her, and the world had listened.